Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Hebrews chapter 12 in our continuing study of the general epistles. Throughout Hebrews, we've seen the big idea that Jesus is better. We saw it in chapters 1 and 2 that he's better than the angels. Chapters 3 and 4, he's better than either Moses or Joshua, giving a better rest. In chapters 5 through 7, he's a better high priest. Chapters 8 through 9, he provides a better covenant. Chapter 10, he offers a better sacrifice. And now we see that he's better as a way of living. So the point is, hold on to Jesus, because now we're going to be seeing how to live as a result of holding on to him. Chapter 12, verse 1, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses, in other words, all those witnesses that we just saw in the previous chapter, all those who by faith were waiting for the promise, did great things by faith, because we have all of those witnesses that we just went through surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with, and here's the key word here, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. You see, we went through that long period of the Old Testament, from Abel all the way to the prophets, and they endured, so let us run also with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes not on them, yes, we have those witnesses, but fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. After all, by faith they did all those things. He's the one that gave the faith, even back then. Notice our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him, he endured. Notice we're to run with endurance because he also endured the cross, despising the shame. Shame was a very big thing in the ancient world. Not that Jesus liked that. It was a shameful thing to hang upon a cross. But he endured the cross, despising the shame, and now has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Verse 3, for consider him who has, there it is again, who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. You see, you are about to face, the writer of Hebrews is saying, you are about to face similar hostility against yourself. But you have one you can keep your eyes on. He's both a savior, but he's also an example. He is both an example, he's also the source of your strength. You keep your eyes on him. You hold on to Jesus. Verse 4, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. It's true that might be coming up, but you're not quite there yet. Verse 5, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. And now he's quoting the Old Testament here. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord. This is going to be our new key word. Do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faith when you are reproved by him. We've already talked about faith, but now we're going to talk about something new, the discipline of God. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. Again, that's an Old Testament quote. They're not hearing that for the first time. That's a familiar passage. Job chapter 5, verse 17. Remember, Job was going through difficult times. Job 5:17. Behold, how happy is the man whom God reproves. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. Also, Proverbs chapter 3, verse 12. For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. So those were two Old Testament passages that were put together, and he was citing that. He said, look, don't you be upset when you go through discipline. It's not necessarily discipline because you did something wrong. It's the discipline of going through to make you stronger. Verse 7, it is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline? Discipline is something that it comes with growth. It comes with training. Any athlete knows Any firefighter knows. There's a certain discipline that you have to learn in order to get good at what you do, in order to grow up. Verse 8, but if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. No discipline means no trainer, no father, no family. And so the discipline can be hard, but it is a good thing. Verse 9, furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? You didn't rebel against your earthly father when he trained you and disciplined you and made you do some difficult things for you to build your strength. You didn't rebel against that. Verse 10, for they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good so that we may share his holiness. And so that discipline idea, the fathers disciplined us and they disciplined us for a short time. It wasn't forever. It might have felt like it was going to be forever. It wasn't. It was as seemed best for them. And he, even better, he's a better father, he also for our good, so that we might share in his holiness. Now, we're going to come back to that in a moment. His holiness. Verse 11, all discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Nobody enjoys discipline. Oh, good, I get to go out and do a bunch of push-ups. Oh, good, but what you do like is the result. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterward it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Verse 12, therefore, strengthen the hands that are weak, and the knees that are feeble, and make straight paths for your feet, so that the limb which is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. You see, this is you know how you have physical therapy? This is spiritual therapy. The difficult things that you go on through in life are for your good. They are your spiritual therapy in order to put you back into joint, in order to connect you with the Lord. Verse 14, pursue peace with all men. And remember that phrase, holiness, I said, remember that? And the sanctification is just being holy, and the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. In other words, God is disciplining you, not in a bad sense necessarily. Of course, it might be. If you step out of line, then yes, you need to be disciplined. But he is having you go through a rigorous training so that he can develop his own person in you, so that he can develop his sanctification, his holiness in your life. Verse 15, see to it that no one comes short of the grace of God. Here's another one of those warning passages. We've seen a bunch of them in Hebrews. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled, that there be no immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. Now, sometimes this is misunderstood when it talks about the root of bitterness. People hear that and they think, oh, that's bitterness. That's when you have this emotional bitterness. No, that's not what it's talking about. When he says that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, he's referencing an Old Testament Hebraism, a Hebrew way of saying something. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 18, where the Lord, actually Moses is speaking, he says, so there will not be among you a man or a woman or a family or tribe whose heart turns away today from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of those nations, that there will not be among you a root bearing poisonous fruit and wormwood. Notice the root here, the root of poison or bitterness, the bitter fruit. It refers to their turning away from God. And so likewise, here in Hebrews, let's go back and look at it, that root of bitterness is described in terms of Esau. That turning away from God is described in terms of Esau, who because of his lack of faith, you see, Esau had been given the birthright, and yet he didn't see it as any worth, and so he sold his own birthright. And the people to whom the author of Hebrews is writing, his recipients are Jewish believers who likewise are in danger of selling their birthright, of rejecting the birthright of their Messiah. Messiah came to the Jews, and they're being tempted to reject him. To do that would be to embrace a root of bitterness, a poisonous root that would lead them astray. Don't be like Esau. And that's a funny thing to tell Jews, descendants of Jacob. Don't be like Esau. You think, Esau? We would never be like Esau. But if they reject the Messiah, that's exactly what they're doing. Verse 17, for you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, even though he sought for it with tears. And the danger is that if these Jewish believers reject the Messiah and try to return to God just like in that Old Testament sense, they can't go back. They'll be rejected. Because once they've seen the Messiah and believed in him, there is no going back. Verse 18, for you have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and to a blazing fire, and to darkness, and gloom, and whirlwind. What he's describing is Mount Sinai. You haven't come to that mountain that can be touched, and to blazing fire, and to darkness, and gloom, and whirlwind, and to the blast of a trumpet, and to the sound of words, which sound was such that those who heard begged that no further word be spoken to them. He's describing Mount Sinai. You haven't come to Mount Sinai. Verse 20, for they could not bear the command, even if a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I am full of fear and trembling. As terrifying as that mountain was, you have come to something even greater. Verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, and the heavenly Jerusalem, not just the earthly Jerusalem. You've come to the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels, and to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood which speaks better than the blood of Abel. You have come to something so much greater than that which they had under the old covenant. Verse 25, see to it that you do not refuse him who's speaking. Who's speaking? Well, I'm not just talking about the writer of the epistle. It's God who is speaking. Don't refuse God. For if those who did not escape when they refused him who warned him on earth, remember back in the Old Testament, much less will we escape who turn away from him who warns from heaven. You see, Old Testament believers, if they rejected God, they didn't escape. God judged them. How much more so if we reject the Messiah, how much more will we not escape? After all, they were on earth. God now warns not on earth. God now warns in heaven. That's a much more serious warning. Verse 26, and his voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, yes, once more, and this is a quote from Habakkuk, yes, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heaven. No, I'm sorry, not Habakkuk, Haggai chapter 2, verse 6. For thus says the Lord of hosts, once more in a little while I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth and the sea, also in the dry land. And Haggai was saying, watch what breaks loose when I shake it. I'm going to cause nations to do things. I'm going to cause kings to do things. And he did some things back then. But you haven't seen any shaking yet. And so we read verse 27, this expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken, as of created things like the temple in Jerusalem, things like the animal sacrifices, things like the ceremonial laws, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. You see, there's going to be some things, and there were things back in that day, that can be shaken. And yet, there's also things that cannot be shaken, that will not be shaken, that will not go away, that will remain. Verse 28. Therefore, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us show gratitude by which we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe. For our God is a consuming fire. Don't transgress against our God. So, verse 27, we saw that we've received a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Verses 28 and 29, because we have an unshakable kingdom, let us respond in gratitude of service. And then in the next chapter, chapter 13, we're going to see that that service involves hospitality, it involves our marriage, it involves being content, and it involves holding to the truth. But we'll see those things next time.